Okay, so to start, obviously, you just navigate and open up the template family. So mine is buried somewhere in here. Hopefully it goes faster than that.
And people feel free to ask questions as Alec goes along.
Yeah, that actually would make it a lot easier probably. If you ask questions, it's probably a better way to learn. And keep me from just droning on about something that maybe everyone already knows, or, you know. So
Alec likes droning.
Yes. Okay. So here's essentially what my template family looks like. There's a couple of things in here. First of all, there's this box which I've created out of symbolic lines, which the gist of it, you pretty much leave it in here for now. That's not going to show up in the family when you import it. It's just there to kind of keep everything centered so it's easy to rotate things. Sometimes when you build a family, it gets kind of asymmetric, which means the base point is awkward to work with. So I kind of made this box to get around that. Kind of a couple other things in here. You have the connector element, which if you're not familiar with it, is what the electrical engineer would use to circuit our fixture to when they're trying to create their panel schedules. And then we have this photometric web, which ideally down the line we're going to kind of take a look at things like the toolbox. I mean, just kind of like different photometric analysis tools that might be able to work with Revit. So we're kind of laying this groundwork to use that now. You most likely won't have to touch these when you're building the family, but just kind of to give everyone a familiarity of what they are. So the most important thing about our families, that our current families are lacking, that these new ones will have, is what is all the parameters inside our family. So if you, essentially, if this is where all of the parameters inside the family are located, we have created, as part of the Revit team, a bunch of new parameters with the idea that not only will we have more functionality with our current families, but also we have like anything that you might typically have in your standard lighting fixture schedules, we're going to include. So things like finish, the description of it, if you wanted an image, where the location is, the manufacturer, as you can see, just kind of goes down there. Just kind of the way we've done it is we've created, even though in some cases there might be duplicates, information. For instance, the lamping here, this is a default Revit parameter that whenever you create a lighting family, it populates it with this. You cannot edit it. You cannot mix around with it. So we've gone ahead and made our own new one just in case there's something we wanted to do with it ourselves. And also to kind of be consistent, if you can see anything that says luminaire in the front is an HLB parameter. That's just to kind of make it easy to realize which ones you should be filling out when you're doing it. Otherwise, it can get kind of confusing, like which ones are important and which ones are not. Another thing to note is we have created a new type mark one, which is this luminaire type. That is in addition to the standard, if you're used to Revit, the type mark, which is part of the identity data down here, or it should be down there. I can't see it for some reason. But anyways, this overwrites also for the same reason, because you cannot modify default types. And again, anyone tell me if I'm going too fast or if you want me to repeat something. So the difference between this and if you just did a regular family and made your own parameters is that these are shared parameters. And shared parameters, the difference being family parameters or shared parameters here, and again, in case anyone missed it, I clicked this button, which is to create a new parameter. The difference being that family parameters cannot appear in schedules or tags, and shared parameters can. Now, essentially, it's just because Revit has no real way of distinguishing between like two family or parameters, which are the exact same spelling and all that, but they are in two different families. Revit cannot recognize that, and they won't link them together. So if you make, like, let's say 5 families with all the same parameter called the same thing, the same units and everything, it will not know to populate them into the same field in the schedule. So that's where this comes in. Now, shared parameters are created by creating a shared parameter file, which essentially is something that ends up looking like this. It's just a text file that populates everything in this location and stores it there, which then families and schedules and things like that can reference and know is the same. Now, I've already gone ahead and kind of created the what I think the typical and most useful parameters will be and put them into this file and preloaded them into our Revit template, so that way hopefully it cuts down on a lot of the work. But just to kind of give you an overview, if for some reason not every family uses the same parameters, in particular in things like the way dimensions work. So just to kind of give everyone an overview of how to load parameters into a family, I'll just kind of show you that really quick. So let's say you wanted to create a new parameter with a shared parameter file. First thing, click this new parameter button. Then you select shared parameter, select, and for this family, it should already be preloaded with my parameter file. But if you need it, if it wasn't there, you click on Edit and Browse, and you go to the location where it is. Or if for some reason you needed to create your own parameter file, you click Create. But ideally, you'd be just adding ones on or selecting from this file. You click Open, and then here's all the parameters, which I have grouped into different groups depending on what their general use is. So, for instance, if we were going to be creating a suspended family, and we needed to have the luminaire hanging distance parameter, we'd go to Dimensions, select luminaire hanging distance, click OK. Well, actually, let me do it again. Got to do it right here. I was in the edit version. So the actual way it will look is you'll just go here, click OK, and then it populates this parameter data section. So luminaire hanging distance defaults to discipline, which is common, and it is a length type parameter, meaning any sort of distance measurement, regardless of units, is length. And then right now it's defaulting to group under dimensions, which is actually what we need, but oftentimes it won't default to that, to the correct one, so you have to select. I've kind of broken them up into the groups that I think are the most logical, if you see over here on the right. Which actually, let me get to that in a second. So assuming we're adding the luminaire hanging distance, we click OK, and then it populates right here under the dimensions. And you can modify that however you want. So just to kind of give you an overview of how I've broken this down, I've got text is pretty much anything that's general kind of identity data, being manufacturer, location, type mark, part number. Ignore this electrical one because it's something I can't get rid of. Electrical lighting is what I've put anything either electrical or photometric here. So you got your center beam candle power, color temperature, input watts, things like that. This apparent load thing here is the default version of Revit's input watts. I find it a little bit confusing, plus we're trying to standardize it, so you would use this input watts here instead. Otherwise it won't populate correctly. And then dimensions, as I've discussed, these are things that allow you to modify the size of your fixture or whichever dimensions they are. In this case, it would be the hanging distance here. Photometrics is, for now, we're going to kind of ignore because this is something that is populated based on that photometric web I just mentioned earlier. In the future, when we start, if we were to try to get some kind of calculation type plugin to work, then we would use this photometrics section here. I just got kind of like cost and lead time data. If you wanted to store that in Revit, you can put it there as well. And then this bottom field, we're going to ignore because it's a default Revit field. So anyone have any questions so far? Or okay, I will just move on then. So once we have these all imported correctly, and in this case, since I'm going to be doing a recessed troffer, I'm going to delete this luminaire hanging distance because it's not going to be suspended. So once we have all these imported, the next step is to, first of all, and you shouldn't have to worry about it, but this connector element, one of the most important things and probably what I find the most commonly asked for aspects of our families is the ability to link our wattage to the connector element so the engineer can circuit it properly. So the way to check that, and again, it should be like this default if you're using my template, but the way to check that is you select the connector element, which is the green one. You go over here to the left in your properties, and the two important fields for us are this voltage and apparent load phase 1. So if you see, you got the associate family parameters button over here. So for voltage, I click on it, we check is associated to our luminaire supply voltage parameter, which means that whatever voltage I input in that field is going to be associated with this fixture. Same thing goes for apparent load phase 1. This is associated with our luminaire input watts field, which means whatever wattage we put in there will be associated with this fixture. Okay, so now to kind of move on, the next part, and probably what will take up the majority of your time if you are creating a family, is to actually create the geometry and how it will appear in 3D when you import it into a model. So, like I said before, I'm going to be creating a just a standard like troffer type fixture. So to start, oops, let me back up for a second. You find the tools to create solids under the Create tab in the Forms one right here. Now, each of these, I mean, if you're familiar with different programs or like 3D CAD and other programs like that, these should be relatively familiar tools to you. I personally have only ever had to use the extrusion, revolve, and void forms tools for the fixtures I've created so far. If there's more advanced ones, you might need to use these for one reason or another, but so far I haven't had to. And also to kind of give you a description, Revit does have a very handy way. If you highlight over it, as you can see, it shows you pretty much what it does when you use the tool. And this is kind of a handy one to understand, like how to do it. For my fixture, I'm going to be using the solid extrusion tool. And make sure you're in a floor plan view for this. And again, this is something that you're going to probably have to just play around with depending on the family you'd be building. But for this one, I'm going to do it from floor plan view. I'm going to draw a rectangle, just arbitrary. It doesn't really matter at this point what the dimensions are. And now the important thing is do not click Finish yet. Go to Annotate and Aligned and use an aligned dimension. Now essentially this is what's going to start to allow us to modify the shape and the size and dimensions of this in the actual model later. So what I always do first is you see we have these reference planes here. And the reference planes are default in the family per Revit, and they're centered on where you want the center of it. So I'm going to use them as kind of guidelines. So the first step is I've grabbed the top edge, and I'm grabbing the center reference plane and the outer one. And that gives you this. Now this equal tool right here automatically centers it referenced to this center line right here. You can do the same thing up here. Equal, now it's like that. So that is just a good way to lock it and make sure that your fixture, when you're modifying the sizes, it doesn't end up floating off into the middle of nowhere. It centers it where the base point is. So the next part is we're going to create our length parameter so we can modify the length. So you grab those two sides and then you select the dimension and you go up here where it says Label, and you can select the parameter you want it to refer to. So in this case, I'm going to make it the housing length. So I select luminaire housing length. Now it's associated with that dimension. Same thing for the other dimension, which is going to be my width. Dimension it, go to Label, select luminaire housing width. And you can create your own parameters. If you have a special case for a family that needs its own dimension, you can go ahead and create your own there. Or I would always check my shared parameter file first because I have a lot of default ones that I expect to be there. But if it's not there, you can always do it by adding parameter and going through that same process I showed earlier. So that leaves us with this, which is our 2x4 shape. I'm going to go ahead and press Finish now to build the solid. And if you look at it in a 3D view, essentially you have just this rectangular prism object right here. To kind of give you an idea of what happens, if I change this from a 4-foot length to a 2-foot length, it'll now become 2 foot by 2 foot. Because I'm going to start with a 4x2 or 2x4, I'm going to stick with that. Next step is you want to be able to vary the height. And just to kind of give people an idea, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with these families, we're not trying to make super realistic families that are 100% accurate to what your fixture is going to be. The idea is to get a relatively accurate representation, so the architect at least has a vague, like a relatively good idea of what is going to be there. So we're not trying to make like a super detailed one. We'd probably need to go to the manufacturer for that. So, anyways, moving on. The next step. So this reference level refers, in this case, to what I consider the ceiling plane. Now, these are unhosted, so technically that's not always going to be the case, but I think it's a good idea to kind of think of the reference level as the ceiling plane. And as you can tell, the box is now located above the ceiling plane. So that means that if I were to place this at the correct location, I would not be able to see this family very well from inside the model. If I was, say, doing a 3D view or a section, it wouldn't go below the ceiling. So what I like to do is make it protrude a little bit below. So I'm just going to arbitrarily drop it down right now. And now there's two steps. First step is the from the top down to this reference level. Now, I generally grab, using the tab button, the reference plane, just because you can modify it easier if you need to. I don't think it would make a difference if you selected the reference plane instead. Just to kind of show you it again. This is the reference plane. If I clicked now, it would reference itself to the level. I'm instead selecting this reference plane. Okay, so that's that. And then the second one is from the bottom up. So the top, I'm going to associate it with the luminaire housing height. So height above the ceiling that this is going to be. And then the bottom, I'm going to associate it with this luminaire trim depth. So whatever the trim is below the ceiling is going to be this height. So for now it's 1 inch, but you can modify that. So that leaves you with a pretty basic understanding of what the fixture would look like if it was a 2x4 that's 5 inches deep and 1 inch trim. If I look at it in 3D view, this is what it looks like. Now, as you can tell, right now it's just a box. I think we try to provide a little bit more detail than that, so that way you can at least tell it's a fixture, not just some box floating in the ceiling. So the next step I'm going to do is create a void form that simulates the idea of a lens on the inside. So I'm going back to the floor plan view, going to the Create tab, then Void Form, which essentially, if you're not familiar with 3D CAD, is a shape that removes another solid shape. So I'm going to use just the void extrusion. I'm going to draw kind of an arbitrary rectangle in the middle of it, and then do the same kind of thing as before, only this time I'm going to reference it to the actual fixture housing. So the way I'm going to do it, I like to do it this way. One there, here, and here. And this is going to be our trim width. Grab them all, and then trim width. And then click check to finish. Now in plan, it already kind of looks more like what we'd want. In 3D, or in section view, this is the void form. It goes way above the top. It actually, you can tell that this is not what a fixture would look like because it's open to the top and not to the bottom. So I'm going to drag it inside a little bit and then drag it a little bit below the reference plane just so I can work with it easier. And now we're going to do the same thing and kind of align it or reference it to the housing. So first one is to the top, and then this guy I'm going to reference to here. So this one's easy to choose because we want it to extend from the bottom of the void form to be level, like flush with the bottom of the fixture housing. So I'm going to change this one to be that same trim depth. This one, now here's where we come into kind of like a good pointer for when you'd be building these. One of the things we want to do, obviously we want to have as much control over what the fixture looks like as we can, but we also don't want to flood people with parameters that they can modify. I mean, if you're modifying like every little internal detail, then it's too much work and not worth it. So what I do to make sure that this doesn't if you shorten this housing right now, this thing is going to extend all the way through the top of it, and then it's going to look, not like a fixture anymore. So we need some kind of reference to keep it within the bounds if you were to modify this trim height parameter. So what I'll do is just choose another parameter that we already use. I'm just going to use this luminaire trim depth one, because I know it's going to be relatively small, and just associate it to that. Even though that's not really what would be the trim depth in reality, it's for our purposes, it's fine. So that leaves us, if you look in 3D view, with something that will look a little more like a fixture in the model. But we're not quite done yet. This is just the basic housing of it. There's a couple of things that we can do. So usually when we have troffer, there's kind of two types that we use now, which are either just one with a flat lens on the bottom and one that has the kind of basket inside it. So what I'm going to do is first create the basket. Same thing, go to floor plan view, extrusion. In this case, I'm going to use the line tool. I'm just going to draw 2 lines. Well, actually, take that back. I'm going to use the square tool. I'm going to make a small square in the middle. Again, go to annotate aligned. First thing, I'm going to grab each of the ends of it, which for some reason this isn't letting me do. There we go. Tab, if you ever can't select something, just a general Revit tip, tab lets you help cycle through and select it. So now I'm going to reference it to the outside and make each of these be that same trim width as we used before. And then what I'm going to do here is another case, one option would have been to make a new basket width parameter. I don't think that's necessary, so I prefer to do this, which is, I'm going to reference it to the outsides of it, and I'm going to make all 3 of these dimensions equal. Okay, so essentially that means that if I were to change this into a 1x4 fixture, the 2 edges, the top and the bottom would shrink, this would shrink with it, and it's pretty good reflectance, or it reflects pretty well what most fixture types are up there. So then check. And then if you go to the front, we have the same kind of issue where it's way too tall. So shorten it. In this case, I will use the same parameter here that I used over here, which is make this the trim depth again, just so it's kind of consistent. And then this one, let's see, there's kind of a few ways you can do this. I think for my purposes, I'm just going to, let's say, make, I'm going to make this one and that one equal. So it's about halfway through. So now, we go into 3D. We have what looks kind of like your standard basket type troffer. And, again, good enough for our purposes. If we had a client who wanted something more in-depth than that, we'd have to, look to alternatives. But for now, in most of our jobs, this is perfectly fine. So that's that. So the next thing I said was, the other one is a lensed one with just a flat lens on the bottom. I made another one of these families beforehand, and in that one I did build a lens as well, but just to kind of save time, I'm going to move on to the next step and just show you what the finished product looks like later. So now we have a fixture that has a basket, but could also be a lensed fixture. Now, how do you prevent it from looking like a basket fixture when you want it just to be a flat lens type fixture? The answer to that lies in visibility parameters. So if you go all the way to the bottom, actually I haven't loaded any in yet, so I'll load this in now. You can create toggle parameters that allow you to, you just say check is yes, uncheck is no. So I have a couple of them already made, so I'm going to go to the shared parameter. It's under my visibility toggles section, and I've got this basket one. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to group it under visibility just to be consistent, and then click OK.
Oh, and the proposal is
so if you can see, it's got this checkbox right there. So the way to make it turn things on and off is you got to select the element you want it to be on or off, and then you go over to the left. It says visible. I check the associate family parameter, and I click this basket. Click OK. And now you can't really tell whether it gets turned on and off in the family editor, unfortunately. See, if I do that, it doesn't do anything. But where you can test it is I have this test project open right now. And I'm going to place it in. And here you go. So here's it without the basket. Click Edit Type. You can go down here and check the basket. And now it's got a basket on. To show you what that looks like in 3D view, there's a better one. So you kind of see. Let's see if
Hey, so Alec, if somebody wanted to add a different toggle than you already have loaded in, how do they do that?
So to do that, sorry, I'm completely just screwed up my view. I'll go back really quick. Come on. Okay, if we wanted to create a new toggle, you just have to do the same. You don't need to associate a toggle with the shared parameter file. The only reason why I did it is just to kind of give you guys examples when you're doing it. If you want to create your own custom, just create new type. It can be a family parameter. Let's say I wanted to toggle, like, let's say I made that lens parameter and I wanted to toggle it. I'm just going to say lens type common. You want it to say yes, no type of parameter. That's the important part. And then I'm going to group it under visibility. Ideally, you would fill out a tooltip here to just explain what it is to anyone else who's picking it up. So I would recommend doing that. I'm not going to do it in this case because I don't want anyone to see me misspell something. And then you have this lens parameter that shows up there. So it's default on, and then you can just do the same thing as you did before, and then associate it over here, and it populates right there. Yes, no parameters are the only type that show up there as far as I know, but I could be wrong about that. So that's that. One thing I really highly recommend is that you do a bunch of, like, kind of just, once you're finished doing all these parameters, enter in a bunch of really bizarre numbers in your lengths and in your parameters and see what they do. If you can break it, that means you need to add some more constraints or something like that. For instance, the first time I did this, actually this is kind of weird. Just do hidden line. Okay. That's interesting. I can't tell why, but this is a good example. Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just looking at it weird. So essentially, you want to be able to test a bunch of random numbers in it and just see if anything breaks it, because otherwise it can cause problems down the line. For instance, this one just screwed up a couple of my dimensions. Oh, the reason being, so I just made the trim depth too high, which means that the fixture housing is going to be exceeded. Essentially what I did, let's see if this is a good way to explain it. I made it so the void form would extend beyond below the bottom, which means that's you can't do that. So that's a good example of something breaking. In this case, it might not be that bad because I don't think I can think of a time when we'd use a 5-inch trim on a fixture like this, but just kind of an example right there. So it's just good practice. Play around with it, see what it does, and then it works. Okay, so to kind of give you guys an idea of what kind of families we're trying to build, the idea that we decided to as a team would be to create families that match what we currently have in our approved list of lighting fixture blocks for CAD. I'm going to go ahead and open up those right now. So one of the issues that comes with that, for this fixture, it's completely easy to do that. You look at this and it looks, yeah, that's what I would make my troffer family look like if I was going to do it in CAD. This is essentially what it would look like. So in this case, it doesn't really matter, but in cases of like a downlight that's adjustable. So if you look at what our standards have, our adjustable downlight is, this adjustable accent right there. Obviously, the family is not going to have an arrow on it, which means it can be some confusion. I mean, if we just use the 3D stuff, all our round downlights would all look the same, whether they're a wall washer, adjustable, what have you. You know, there's a few examples of things like that. But since we want everything to kind of be uniform as a firm, what we've decided to do is make them all look that way. And how you do that, I'll show you right now. So first step, and let me change this back to our default sizes right now to make it easier to work with. So here's how you do that. First step, I would go to some view where you can see everything, select it, filter out everything that's not the part that says light fixtures or void. So in this case, it's just those two. So now you got only the solid objects selected. Go up to visibility settings. In this case, it automatically showed up. And uncheck plan/RCP view. So that means that in a front, back, or left, right, or in a 3D view, anything 3D that we just built will show up, but in a plan/RCP, it will not. So just to show you that, now that I've checked that, I'm going to load it in. And our fixture's gone. So that just means that we need to do another thing, and you can kind of see, damn, right there. Yeah, so our family's still there, but we can't see it. In 3D view, we can. There it is. So what we do to make it so you can see it in plan is essentially just draw lines that will show up only in a plan or RCP view. So the way to do that, you go to a plan view, go to annotate, symbolic line, and then you have your tools just like in basic Revit. So what I'm going to do is draw two squares on top of each other like that. I draw them way outside the fixture because it's easier to work with that way. And now I'm going to do the same thing we did at the start, which is pretty much use these aligned tools to dimension the fixture. So here's our total width, here's our total length. Got to do the same thing, linking it to the center and centering it.
Hey Alex, this is Jenny from New York office. So there's a easier way. You don't need to do like all those dimensions again. You can just pull this line to where you want to attach, like to the 3D models. You can just drag them to there and like lock them, and then they will be attached to whatever you want.
I guess I'll have to play around with that more because I've done that in the past and it didn't work. Maybe I didn't do it right back then. So if you guys can figure out how to make that work, that's great. That saves you a lot more time.
Yeah.
So I personally have had issues doing it, but yeah, by all means, if you can make it work, that's great. I'm not going to try to do it right now because I'm afraid I'll screw it up and confuse people. But
okay. Yeah. Just want to mention that you can do that another way.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess ask you if you want to learn how to do that because I'm the wrong person to ask. Okay, so same thing, length, width, there it is. Then we have, here's our inside, which is going to be the trim, essentially. Link it like that. One thing to note, always select the dimension, the object you want to have linked first. Otherwise, I think it will kind of affect the objects that whatever object you select first is essentially the one that's going to be moved based on these parameters. So always select the line that you want to have move first. Trim width. Okay. And then the last step would be our basket, which is just going to be 2 lines. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. Equal. Okay, and again, we have to make sure that these only show up when we have the basket one selected. So I select the 2 lines, I go to visible, I select basket. So now, when I load it in, there it is. And when I uncheck basket, there it is. So let me just check my notes. I think that's pretty much it in terms of setting up symbols. Yeah, that's the majority of how you would do this kind of thing. Now, obviously, this is a troffer. It's about as simple as it gets. Some of them are going to be a little more advanced, and I have some kind of tips on how to do that. If you're not familiar, we'll try to assign fixtures to people depending on their skill, but there's a lot of resources online as well. Oh, I just realized there's something else we should cover as well. So this is your typical kind of like, let's say, unit fixture. You buy it as one unit, and then it has a set wattage and set cost essentially, and it is what it is depending, no matter which fixture you're looking at. Now, the other thing that we're going to run into is things like linear, continuous, or dynamic fixtures that will have like a ton of different lengths on the project, but might also have the same type. So I'm going to show you a previous fixture I've created, which is this unhosted linear recessed fixture. And kind of show you what we do in those set cases. And this is before I knew how to really clean this thing up, so don't be frightened by all the dimensions going on there. But the main difference you'll find between this kind of fixture and a unit fixture is this luminaire input watts has a per length function. So it's another type of parameter I created that's input watts per length, and I link it to the base input watts through this equation right here. And it's also related to the length, which also is going to be slightly different. So there's one major difference between these two parameters right here. If you look back in this create parameter right here, well, all this is what we looked at. I did not touch on this type versus instance thing. So to kind of give you a basic understanding of what they are, so a type would be, no matter how many instances you create of it, they will all use the same parameter regardless. So that means in a type parameter, I will enter in 4 feet, and every single one of those fixtures is 4 feet. If I decide to change one of them, all the rest of them will change with it. Instances vary by instance. So essentially, you can change it as you're building it, and the family won't care. So that is the major difference between doing a linear continuous fixture and a unit fixture, is you need to have that checked. So, and then those kind of have like certain kind of difficulties with them. You can't use them in certain equations, and they are hard to read in some cases in schedules. But it's what allows us to have, you enter in your per length wattage. In this case, let's just say it's 5 watts per foot. And then it's 4 feet long, so this automatically calculated. It's a total of 20 feet. So the reason why it says default next to it, though, is because when you first place this fixture, it will default to a 5 watt, 4 foot long, with 20 total watts fixture. So that anytime you're doing any kind of continuous fixture, you got to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, when we get to things like if you wanted to do a quantity takeoff and you wanted to get your total linear footage, if you don't have a length parameter that is instance-based, it will not add them all up. It will just take, it'll say, oh, they're all 4 feet. And then you won't really have a good idea of how much length of a fixture you actually have. Same thing with energy calcs. It will only calculate, no matter whether it's a 20-foot fixture or a 5-foot fixture, they'll all have this same base wattage if you do not make this different. Does anyone have any questions on that? Or okay. So that's that. I'm going to go ahead and open up the troffer family that I had already created and show you there's one more kind of important note that I think, Andrew, unless there's something you can think of. If you see here, we have under the types, I've created a bunch of what I'll call default. Yeah, just default, like as you import the family, they'll have this. So we have a 1x4, basket and lens, 2x2, 2x4, etc. And the idea here is to make it very easy in certain cases. If, you just want a 2x4 fixture, you don't want to hassle with adjusting whatever I've had in here, I made these default templates here. So, let's just choose this 2x2 basket. This looks like a 2x2 basket right here. I can choose the next one, 2x4 basket. Here's the 2x4 basket. That doesn't mean that you can't change them later. It just means that these are the default types that we import with. If I wanted to create a new one, all I'd have to do is choose the template I want, create new, call it a new type. Let's just say it's going to be our F1. And then I can go here and make this a 10-foot long one if I want to. And then I can always still change back, though, to this 2-foot. So, actually, let me just show you. So there's our 10-foot long troffer. But I can always change it back to this 2x4 one and click OK, and there it is. So I'm just wanted to make sure that that was kind of clear. And it's one of the things that we would like to have done when you create your families. So, for instance, my downlight family, I made default versions that have an adjustable turned on, a wall wash turned on, and just the plain downlight turned on. So that way, anyone, especially people who aren't as familiar with Revit, they can just drop in and say, hey, yeah, I want to use a downlight. Let me just grab it and go. So that's kind of how you do that. And I think that is the majority of what we need done. There's a few more advanced things, but it's kind of stuff that once we get the base, we kind of want to get the base families in first, and then we can kind of do it very easily later. But I think it's for the most part all we really need. Is there anything you can think of, Andrew, that I'm forgetting to touch on, or?
No, I think that's really good, and I think we should just open it up to others for questions and comments.
So yeah, any questions? So I assume that means that everyone understands 100% how to do this, and I can just start assigning you fixture families to work on.
Mwahahahaha.
I actually have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Bahar from LA. So this way, you're suggesting this is only family creation using your own geometry. What if we were about to use a preset geometry, like something more complicated, let's say a lumen beam grande head fixture? Is there a way to integrate these parameters to that preset?
Yeah, I think there should. All you'd really have to do, and I kind of wish I had a family that didn't have these in. Maybe I can grab one of our old HLB ones, which in a way actually could be a good way to go about this. If we have a fixture family that we've already created that is good enough, has enough flexibility geometrically wise, then we can do this. But let's see. I'm just gonna. Here's our old HLB families. I'm gonna see maybe this parabolic troffer one.
But let's say that doesn't ever happens with like a SAT file.
Sorry?
SAT files, the files we obtain from CAD files. Let's say we cannot really modify those, right? As a whole.
I don't entirely think I know. I'm not familiar with that, so I guess I can show you how to take a family that does not have these parameters and import them. Is that what you want, or like I assume like unless there's some restraint put on it, like let's say we had to use on a certain project only manufacturer provided Revit files, but they also want us to integrate it in our schedule. I assume unless that manufacturer somehow restricted their use, which I don't think is probably common, all you'd have to do is open it up, and then like right here, we don't have any of my parameters in here. But all you'd have to do is click New Parameter, Shared Parameter, and then essentially browse to the shared parameter file, which I will be providing to everyone. Open it, and then all of the parameters are right here. You just have to one by one click OK, and essentially move them in. So let's say I want to add a beam angle 1 into this. There it is. I can group it wherever I want and click OK, and then it is right here. So I think that answers your question, but maybe I don't quite understand it. Does that help?
Yes, that helps, yeah.
And now, Alec, we have manufacturers that will, give us Revit families, but I think oftentimes they don't have the connector in it. It'll just be the geometry, which is great, which it gets us almost there. So why don't we show how we would add a connector, which would be in addition to adding the shared parameters.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So this family had a connector, but I decided to delete it just for this. I think it's under Create. Yeah, Create, and then it's called Electrical Connector. I think you just, it's face-based. If I just chose work plane based. In case, I'll just do it again, just in case anyone's not familiar with how to use hosted families. But it's hosted, so you got to choose whether it's placed on a face or placed on a work plane. I'm going to choose work plane because it's more workable. I'm going to use this reference level right here, which is the default one, and click OK. There it is. I always make sure I pin it so it doesn't move when someone's accidentally, messing around with the family. And then make sure that you have that same, which I don't have it loaded right now, parameters linked to it. So I'm just going to do that again really quick just so people see how to do it. But electrical input watts, I put it under lighting usually. And then shared parameter electrical supply voltage. Also, I put under lighting just to group it easily. So those two are right there. I'm going to call this one 50 watts. I'm going to call this 120 volts. Click Apply or OK. And then you select the electrical connector, voltage, luminaire supply right there, and luminaire input watts. And there it is. So now you can see over here it's 50 watts or volt amps and 120 volts. So I think that should even in like short-term cases before, like if you have like a fire drill for a Revit, a client wants you to have something like that, you could even do this basically yourself with our current families, and it would make them functional with that. So let me think if there's anything else. I can't think of anything else. I'll just kind of give you guys an idea what we are planning to do. So I think the idea, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong about anything, but I think the kind of idea is if anyone is ever like light on work, or they think they'll be able to spend an hour or so a day sometime and just build a family, you just reach out to myself or Andrew or just the Revit team in general and let us know that. And we kind of are, and I haven't sent out this list yet, but we have kind of a running list of what families still need to be built to make up this entire palette of current families that we have in CAD. And then we'll just essentially assign you one or two based on either your skill level or what you think you can handle or how much time you have, and then build it. Once you get it done, you'd send it back to us. The Revit team would then vet it and make sure it meets all of what our requirements are, and either give you comments or make the adjustments ourselves. And essentially, hopefully, that way we can relatively quickly make up an entire palette of families without taking any one person's time, like taking too much of their time. So that's kind of the way we see things going. So yeah.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, so I managed to not go over our hour, which makes me happy. I guess and of course, always let us know if you think of anything later on. Otherwise, I guess everyone just have a good weekend.
Thank you, Alec.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. Bye.